today we're going to be building a password saving program with Java. A few things real quick about Java. Java is a programming language similar to C++, Python, and C#. It's a great place to start for beginners because it's used everywhere, and it's definitely the most versatile coding language. The Java motto is write once, run everywhere, which means you write the code once and you're able to run it anywhere as long as it has the properties for Java. So the first thing we're going to cover real quick is the concept of an IDE. IDE is an integrated development environment, and that sounds scary and fancy, but it's basically just a home for your code. It acts as a text editor like Word or Notepad for writing the code. It acts as a debugger, which is a way of saying finding problems with the code, and also as a compiler for running the code. So that we don't have to download any additional software to our computer, we're going to be coding in an online IDE. So this is what it's going to look like when you pull it up. You should note that when you use an online compiler, the work will not be saved unless you go over here and create an account, or you can save the code to your computer after we've built it all. You just copy and paste it. When you pull up the compiler, it's going to look like this. And I'm going to make a few notes about what we call syntax, or just sort of the language of coding really quick before we start. In code, a section of code is enclosed in brackets, and that's these things right here. This is important because make sure that as you're following along, you pay attention to your bracket, just the placement of them. A lot of first-time programmers run into errors with their brackets because they'll accidentally, like if you copy and paste a section of code or if you delete it, you'll forget about the bracket here at the end and your compiler will complain. Another thing about syntax is all actions that you do or sentences that you write are going to end with a semicolon, this right here. So this is like a statement, like a sentence. And that's another thing to pay attention to, because if you forget that semicolon, you will get an error. Coding is a language, and as with any language, there are rules. So we can go ahead and start programming. So we can just go ahead and delete everything that's in here. So in Java, every application begins with a class name. So let's go ahead and create our public class, and we're going to call it passwords. So we're going to say public class passwords, and we're going to do our bracket. Some things to note: classes should begin with a capital letter by convention. So let's call it capitalized passwords. Within the class, we're going to write our main function, and the keywords we use for that are public, static, void, main, all lowercase, and then we're going to open up parentheses, and we're going to write string with an uppercase, args, and then 2 brackets. Make sure to note that string is capitalized and that this string args business happens within the parentheses. And again, we're going to do some brackets so that everything we write in here is contained in this function. And ta-da, we have set up our first class. So the next concept we're going to go over is variables. So variables are containers for storing data. When programming, you have to tell the system what you will be storing so that the system knows exactly how much space or RAM to allocate for that item. Computers are not intuitive. You have to tell them exactly what you want them to do. There are different types of variables. There's what's called an int, and that's for storing whole numbers like a 1 or a 2 or a 1089. There's what's called a double, and that is used for storing decimal point numbers, so like 1.3 or 17.9. There is what's called a char, which is used for storing a single character like A or U. And there's what's called a string, which is used for storing whole lines of text like this is my variable. There are other variables that you can get into on the other websites that I'll share if you want to learn more. But those are sort of the main important for our purposes today. We're going to start by storing one single password in our program, and later I'll show you how you can add more. So let's store our FSU password. So the first thing that we have to do is, like I said, tell the computer exactly what it is we're going to be storing. And this is going to be a string because it's a password or a line of text. So we're going to say string, note the capitalization of string, equals, and we'll do FSU password. And note that the value of the variable, which is what we want to store, it has to be in double quotes for string variables, because we want to tell the computer that this is the whole thing. It starts here and it ends here. We have to give the variable a name. We have to give the variable a name so that we can call it back later. And we'll be declaring more variables of different types later in the process. All right, so to break this down, this is the type of variable, this is the name, and this is the value that we're storing. Variables start with lowercase letter by convention, so we can do FSU in lowercase to keep with conventions. We can move on to the concepts of output and input. So when I say output, I mean printing from the program to the screen. And when I say input, I mean gathering data from the user typing in the keyboard. And output is fairly easy. All you have to do is write system, S.out.println, do some parentheses, do some quotes inside the parentheses, end it with a semicolon. Remember, pay attention to those semicolons. And then whatever you write in those quotes is what's going to be output to the screen. So here's what I want to print. And this is how we run the program up here in execute. So I'm going to click execute, and here it is. Here's what I want to print. So we're going to use this output to set up our menu for our password program. So let's do just a blank line for the top. If you don't put anything in the parentheses, it just prints out just a blank line. And let's do another system.out.println with the parentheses, end it with a semicolon, quotes in there. Let's say, which password would you like to retrieve? Okay. And let's do another statement underneath. And let's say option 1 is the FSU password, semicolon at the end. Let's make option 0 exit program. And let's print out one more blank line. So now we're going to move on to input. So we need to be able to read the menu choice entered by the user. In Java, input is handled by something called the scanner class. So just like we're writing a passwords class here, someone else out there wrote a scanner class to help programmers like us do things like handle input. And there are hundreds of public Java classes out there. So this over here, it looks big and scary, but this is just a list of all the classes out there. Look, there are hundreds that someone else wrote to make programming in Java easier for you. So to get access to that scanner class, that's this one right here, we need to do what's called importing it. So up at the top, before everything else, we're going to write import. Note that that's lowercase, and we're going to write java.util.scanner. And scanner is an uppercase S. And what that statement does is it tells the computer that we're going to be using the Java util scanner class. And also note the semicolon at the end there. So in order to use the class that we've imported, we need to do what we call creating a object. So this is similar to what we talked about earlier with declaring variables. We need to tell the compiler that this is what we're going to be using. So to do that, we're going to write scanner, capital S, let's name it in, and we're going to set that equal to a new scanner, parentheses, and we're going to write system.in and semicolon. I'm going to break this down for you. So this is similar to this. We're telling the computer what it is we're going to be storing or using. In is the name, like FSU is the name, in is the name. This statement right here is what's called initializing the variable, so pointing it to something. And the system.in portion just tells the computer that the input is going to be coming from the keyboard. We need to create a variable that is going to store the choice of the user. So let's go over here and we set up the menu so that the choices are going to be a value of 1 or 0 so far. So it's going to be an int. So we're telling the computer that our variable is going to be an int. And let's name it choice because it's going to be the user's choice. Note that int is not capitalized, and also note that we don't set it equal to a value yet like we did with this one. And that's because we want the value to come from the choice that the user has put in. We're going to be using this scanner object. So we're going to write choice equals in.next int parentheses and semicolon. And to break this down, so choice is the name of our menu choice variable. We declared it here and we're initializing it here. In is the name of our scanner object here. And next in is a function that is part of the scanner class. So what that means is when we import the scanner class, we're allowed to use all of the tools that it provides to us. So just like this is a method or a function, this is a method that we're calling from our code. Scanner has all sorts of things to help you handle input. There's next int, this is the one we're using. That's going to store a integer, or where's next right here. That's how you take in like a whole line of text. So this line is using the scanner object in to read the next integer, the number entered by the user, and storing it in our choice variable. One thing to note that makes the online compiler a little bit tricky versus coding on your computer is that you have to put in the input ahead of time. And you do that over here with standard in. So we can run this to make sure it works. Let's type in a 1 here. Let's go back here and click execute. So we can see that our menu program printed and it took in the variable that we typed in. Nothing came out because we haven't set it up to do so yet. But the fact that the program ran and didn't give any errors means that it's working okay. The next concept we're going to talk about is control structure. So we want our program to tell us what passwords we stored based on what number we've entered in the menu choice. And we're going to do that using if, else statement. So let's sort of think this through logically. And I'm going to outline this using comments. So a comment is 2 slashes there, and anything you type after that will not be read by the compiler. The computer will just skip it because it knows that it's a comment. So let's think this through. So if the user enters a 1, we want the program to display the FSU password. And you don't have to write this along with me. We're just sort of thinking it through. Or if the user enters a 0, we want to quit the program. Otherwise, the user made an incorrect entry and we want to tell them to enter a different value. So now let's kind of turn this logic into our if-else statements. So the way we do that is we're going to write if, and we're going to put parentheses, and we're going to write choice equals 1 and do our brackets here. Real quick, make note of the parentheses there. What is in the parentheses after you type the if statement is what's called the conditional. And the conditional is what the if statement is checking for. If what's in here is true, then what's in here is going to run. Otherwise, it moves on to the next line of code. And also note that we have 2 equal signs here versus 1, like up here. And that's because there are kind of 2 different things happening here. So up here, we're doing what's called assignment, variable assignment. We're assigning this value into this variable. This we're doing checking. So we're checking if choice is equal to 1. So down here, we're going to say else if choice equals 0, put our brackets, and definitely make sure that you're not putting this part inside these brackets. Pay attention to kind of the placement there. Again, what's inside the parentheses is what we're checking for. And then down here, we're going to write else and do our brackets again. So we've just sort of turned this logic into code. If the user enters a 1, or if the user enters a 0, otherwise, here we are. So now let's go ahead and put the code that will make things happen. So to have the program print the password we want, we're going to use the system.out.println just like before. So we're going to write system.out.println, do our parentheses, end it with a semicolon, put the quotes in there. Just for formatting purposes to make this look kind of nice, I like to do some dashes because that will sort of frame the password that we're printing, and you'll see that when I execute it. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I just think that it sort of makes it look nice. And we can just go ahead and copy and paste this. Let's do it twice and replace the middle one. We're going to write password is, and then a space, and then we're going to write a plus sign and the name of our variable. So a few notes, we have this plus sign here because we want the system.out statement to print the value that's in our variable here. So it's going to print password is, and then this right here. And we add a space here at the end because if we were not to do that, it would print like, it would look like this. So again, the computer is going to do only what you tell it to. So we add that space in there for like formatting. So let's run that real quick and I'll show you what it looks like. So I have 1 here. 1 is going to go into the choice variable. And if all goes correctly, it should print out our FSU password. Let's see. The reason that we have a space in between this statement and this one is because we have this empty print statement after this. So again, just formatting things, okay? So we can just take this whole thing and paste it into our else if statement here for if the choice equals 0. And we're going to write, let's just write goodbye. Because if the user enters a 0, then they're trying to exit the program. So we'll just say goodbye. So if the user doesn't enter a 1 and they don't enter a 0, then they put an incorrect menu selection. They gave an option that we do not have here. So let's write a statement. Again, we can just paste it. Let's tell them that they did an incorrect menu selection. So let's say incorrect menu selection. And again, take note of making sure that your statements are within the quotes. Make sure that you're paying attention to the parentheses as well, and make sure that you're ending your statements with semicolon. We want this program to store more than 1 password, right? Like we want to have access to however many passwords we want so that we can keep track of all of our passwords. So I'm going to show you real quick how you can add more passwords to this. It's super easy. It's 3 easy steps. So let's add an option for our Snapchat password. First step is to add a new variable. So capital string, let's call it Snapchat equals Snapchat password. Step 2 is we need to add an option in our menu for the user to pull out that password. It's probably easier to just copy and paste that. And we're going to change the 1 to a 2 and change FSU to Snapchat. And step 3 is we need to add an additional else if statement so that if the user does enter a 2, they don't get the incorrect selection because we only have options for 1 and 0. So we can just take this whole thing. We should put this after the 1 so it stays in order. So let's change that to a 2. Change this to password is plus, and then the name of the variable. So 3 easy steps. You add the variable, add the choice for the user, and then add what will happen if they make that choice. So let's test that. Let's put a 2. So this printed out, this is 2, we put in a 2, and the password is Snapchat password. And if you change your password, all you have to do is go in and change this variable. So say I change my Snapchat password to just password, run it again, and it changed the value there. So super easy way to store your passwords. So congratulations, you just built an awesome Java program. You have learned the fundamentals and you can use these concepts you've learned to make your own programs. Just to rehash sort of the things that we covered. Variable assignment, we did a string variable, we did an int variable. We did the int variable with input, but you can also just go ahead and assign something. So I could do like this equals 1, similar to how I did the string up here. We covered output, like how to print to the screen. We covered input, we covered control structures, how to go through if else, and you can use those pieces to build all sorts of different programs on your own.